Hello and welcome to the Atlanta History Center's virtual author talk featuring Raven Leilani in conversation with Gail O'Neill for a discussion of Raven's debut novel, Luster. I'm Kate Whitman, Vice President of Author Programs and Community Engagement for the History Center, and I'm glad that you're joining us this evening. You can purchase copies of Luster from Acapella Books, our official book-selling partner, at the link in the chat to the right of your screen. Also, that link is provided on the History Center's website. As Raven and Gail are talking, please submit your questions via the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Gail will get to as many of them as time allows, but I know she's got a lot of her own as well. Raven Leilani's work has been published in Granta, the Yale Review, McSweeney's Quarterly Concern, Conjunctions, The Cut, and New England Review, among many other publications. Leilani received her MFA from NYU and was an Axon Foundation writer-in-residence. She was recently named a 2020 5 Under 35 honoree by the National Book Foundation and has received well-deserved critical acclaim for Luster, her debut novel. Gail O'Neill is a writer for artsatl.org, where she covers arts and culture in Atlanta. She's the host and co-producer of Collective Knowledge, a weekly series of conversations with artists, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders, which can be viewed on YouTube, Facebook, and Thea Network. Thank you both for being here. Gail, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kate. And I will try to balance my questions with those from the audience, because I find the cross-generational conversations taking place around this book so interesting. All right, my screen just went dark, so I'm just going to keep talking in hopes. Are you still there, everyone? Yes. Okay, good. Hi, Raven. Welcome to it. Well, welcome virtually to Atlanta. I want to start out with a quote from your former teacher. She said, and this is Zadie Smith, "I've taught creative writing for almost 20 years now, and in that time, some patterns have emerged. For example, the most bombastic young man in the class often turns out to have written the worst novel. Sometimes the most analytic, brilliant readers make curiously rigid and dull writers. And not infrequently, the seemingly quiet girl who speaks rarely but stares at the book in her hand with a strange intensity is among the best scribblers of the lot. So was it with Raven Leilani." I mean, that is some praise. So can you describe from the inside what Zadie Smith was seeing on the outside?
Can I say, I mean, it is still kind of surreal to hear you read that. You know, I feel like Zadie has been, like, she, you know, obviously didn't have to do that. And she has been, that kind of is a great way of showing the generosity that she showed me while I was in the program. And I remember when I read that, I felt, I mean, this is a thing people say, and so it's almost cheapened, but like I did feel seen in the way that I have absolutely always been kind of more of an internal person, and kind of speaking in real time off the cuff, I find quite difficult and often feel frustrated with myself for how imprecise I am when I'm actually talking in real time. But I feel like under her, you know, her tutelage, I was allowed to just be that and to write shamelessly and without anxiety, or at least if I had anxiety, I was able to come to her and have her hold that for me. Like that felt like a real gift, because I think in writing a book like this, you know, there's the temptation to want to, you know, especially when you've been granted really rare space, you know, as a Black woman, to tell a story, to share a story. You want to do it justice, and you don't want, you don't want to use that room to kind of tarnish that representation, right? And so as I was writing, you know, a messy Black woman, I did feel, you know, I felt that I needed to be free, but I also felt conscious of what it means to write in this space when you're among a few. But ultimately, what what her mentorship has meant to me was writing toward the truth, writing toward what is human, and to be human is to be messy.
Part of the reason I'm so interested to hear what viewers tonight have to say about the novel is that I'm part of your mother's generation. So I'm like the mommy or the auntie who felt very protective of Edie when she was not being polite, when she was not being circumspect, when she was not being careful. I wanted to hold her and say, honey, try doing it this way.
Yeah.
But I see among millennials this level of excitement that, you know, we want to see the young Black girl who is a hot mess, who doesn't have to be perfect, who is not this monument to justice. So talk to me about the responses that you've gotten from different generations of readers.
Sure. So you're right. It has kind of been a bit split, though I will say I feel like I've heard mostly from millennials because they tend to be more online. And it is interesting, and I actually understand both sides. And I feel like it was talking about it just a little bit before this of, the fact of taking up, inhabiting that rare air and wanting to depict a Black story where there's love and joy and where, Black women are allowed to thrive, as opposed to fail, which is what happens in this book. And I think the millennial response, and I am a millennial, is one that, I felt it was important to write against the idea of respectability. The idea that there is a particular way to comport yourself, to be afforded empathy. If people did come away from this book finding Edie an unlikable character, and almost certainly she does a lot of unlikable things, I would want to recontextualize that and talk about what we're saying, what we're qualifying as unlikable. And I think what we end up arriving at is that her responses are human responses. She is navigating through a deeply pressurized environment, an environment that's racist and sexist, and her responses match the brutality of that environment. And I do think that there is it is liberating to not have to suffer that well or bear that well. I think that, not to go off on a tangent, but I do think that there is this mandate, and we've had to be strong. Like, that's part of it is because we have had to be strong, to survive. But I do think that the mandate that we be stoic in the face of, adversity and pain is a dehumanizing demand.
I'm
And
glad you, go ahead.
no, and so I just wanted to afford her, Edie on the page, the right to, to feel it in the way that a human would feel it.
When you bring up environment, I think about New York City being a central character in the novel, and how there's this long tradition in film and television and literature of these depictions of New York that are so romantic and so glossy that young women get stars in their eyes in the middle of Wisconsin thinking, dreaming of moving to New York. I grew up in New York, which I love. I'm in Georgia now. But after reading your depiction of New York, I don't think I'd be racing to the big city anytime soon. You're a New Yorker now, correct? And you love the city, correct?
I really.
All right, so why does New York come off as so smelly and so aggressive and so hostile? And Edie herself contributes. She pats herself on the back for beating a pregnant woman to one of the last available seats on the subway. I have seen that in New York, so that's true.
She sure does, and so that is definitely an example in which that is not a response to like a structural kind of impediment. That is Edie doing a bad thing, right? But I do think that, like, I love the city so much. I was born here, and I've spent, most of my young adulthood upstate, which I feel like I always have to mention, because I do want to give the credit where credit is due to New Yorkers who've been here, and who've lived here the whole time. But I'm currently in Brooklyn, and I love this city, and it was really a pleasure to be able to depict it in a way that felt honest and not like hagiography. I feel like a love letter to the city is, if you know the city and love the city, is also a list of grievances. Like, I think that they are one. And in this case, her environment, the environment of the city, she doesn't, have a locked in Soho. Like her environment is a direct function of her kind of state in the world, and her state is one of extreme precarity. She's kind of still trying to figure out how to pay her student debt, how to eat. She cannot live without a roommate. And she kind of comes up against the problems that you would come up against when you were a young person trying to seek stability in a city that is extremely hard to live in and extremely indifferent to how much you love it, and I think about, like, I love the city so much, but to, during the moments where I've tried to proselytize about the city that I love, inevitably the person I'm talking to is like, you sound like you have Stockholm syndrome, and I wanted to depict those two sides, because I feel like those, the side that is where there are roaches, where there are mice, where, your landlord is, will kick you out if you don't pay, is a real version of the city for so many of us. Even though, I do enjoy the programming where the city is the kind of city where there are nothing but the stars in your eyes.
Yeah. Part of Edie's journey, as you say, is just the grinding, having to work and having to support herself. And one of your descriptions of one of her jobs, she's delivering food for like a Grubhub type service. And it felt prescient. Now we're thinking about essential workers and how a lot of their work is dehumanizing. It's very transactional. And in one of your passages, the description of Edie talking about delivering food and how she's almost treated like she's an ATM. She's just there to deliver something, then get out, made me think about the way that I interact with people who are human beings, but there to conduct a service. You yourself have had that job. So what is it you'd like to say about the nature of work and how some work is dehumanizing and how we customers can be complicit in that dehumanization?
Absolutely. I did. I worked for Postmates shortly before I came back to New York, actually. So I was doing it in DC, so I kind of transplanted it before I came back to New York for my MFA. Like, I was trying to build a cushion, because I knew that I'd need one to live in this city. And, I think there's much to be said about the gig economy, the way that it flattens you, and almost the impossibility of rising to the demand of late capitalism, where you are faceless, and trying to, while also trying to kind of carve out a living for yourself. There's a moment in the book where she realizes that she hasn't heard her own voice for a long time, and she's kind of searching for kind of conversation topics to feel like she is real. So I think, in those scenes, I wanted to depict, the brutality of that work, the kind of the way that work flattens you, and the way that it, I'm trying to articulate it in the best way I can, but the way that it is like the city that we were just talking about, there is a kind of indifference in, there's a kind of indifference in the people that you interact with, a kind of, you feel like you have been made into a commodity, even though you kind of feel like you're a part of a machine that is, that kind of, I'm struggling to articulate that, but from the work that I did when I was on my route, I feel like that was one way that I saw the kind of different dimensions of the city that I was not privy to, from the state that I lived in. And when I wrote those scenes with Edie, I wanted to show that. I wanted to show her moving in and out of those rooms, and the way her Blackness, the way her womanhood has great bearing on how precarious that job is. She's constantly aware of the way her body is imperiled. And that kind of work, even though, if you're a customer, you're simply, perhaps not now, but meeting them at the door and, retrieving your food, it is still a work that is deeply bodily, that is also done for pennies. And so I wanted to shine a light on that, but that was also just kind of part of I think, like a commercial mechanism that she is constantly striving against just to eat. So that is almost no different. Like, I mean, it is different, but it is almost no different from, the pennies she is perhaps making with the publisher, the way that she is trying to strive upward and constantly meeting these, these impediments that are beyond her control. Even though she is, although, she's making some decisions at work that perhaps preclude her ability to advance, but I wanted to include all aspects of that.
Part of the tragedy for me in reading about Edie was this duality. On the one hand, she feels so conspicuous and she's so sensitive, she's so observant, she notices everything. And she's also kind of invisible to not only to the people she's handing food to when she's delivering, but her colleagues. They don't really see her. Talk about writing that kind of a character and reconciling that duality.
Yes. So, I mean, I feel like both Edie, many of like the Black women across this book are working and kind of toiling within environments that cannot adequately witness them. Edie and Aria at the publisher, where they have different tactics of survival. One which Aria's, tactic, which is acknowledging the kind of razor thin margin for error that many Black women, encounter professionally, and the way that kind of forces an inhumanity and perfectionism and suppression of personhood that is untenable, or the other kind of extreme, which is, a real response to that indignity, that is a response that is more desperate and more messy, which is, I think, Edie's response. And Akila, who is being, raised in a suburb where she doesn't see anyone who looks like her, and so is trying to cobble together, an idea of what her Blackness means to her, where there is no Blackness. And so I think to write about Black women who are trying to, secure some stability and or trying to be seen in these environments that that aren't built to see them or recognize them on their own terms, it creates a combustible byproduct, and it creates a real friction between like the private self and the public self, and that's part of why I wrote it in first person. And I thought that to to be able to get at that friction, I would have to be able to open her mind on the page, so that you could see her most candid thoughts up against what the performance that she's engaged in, to survive.
My takeaway is that Edie's biggest desire is just to be seen and to be held, to be cared for. And there's a meta theme throughout the novel of people wanting to document things that are important. Eric is an archivist. His wife is a medical examiner. And then there's Edie, who's an artist, as are you, a visual artist. But somehow she cannot produce a self-portrait. She can't even see herself. What is it about documenting what's in front of us and archiving what's here today compelling to you as an author?
I'm so glad you noticed that. That was really important for me to kind of show the way that, indulging that performance as she has to do to survive, and meaning like indulging the performance is a way of being unseen, is a maintenance of a mask. And because she has spent so much bandwidth, kind of maintaining that facade, when it's time to actually try and translate herself into paint, when it's time to be able to try and see herself, she can't, because she has, that kind of kabuki has distorted her. And, I've definitely felt that in my life. And I think that writing for me, and sometimes painting even for me, was a way of preserving myself. Was a way of affirming that my reality and the reality of people like me is real and has value. And I also think that like you're totally right. There's art, there's the art of archival sciences. I also used to work as an archivist, so that's part of why it's in there. And there is the way the body keeps record. My mom used to be a medical examiner, and I went to see her work, and she would, as she was working, she would show the way the body, keeps track of what has been done to it along that lifespan. So like I do think it is natural and it is human to retain a record, but it is also extremely necessary, because I do think it is a human need to feel that you are seen, to feel that you are present, and that and that you matter. So I think that's totally right. Throughout this book, I think more than anything, Edie is seeking, she's seeking intimacy, but she's also seeking, she wants to be made real.
I admire your willingness to forego all the throat clearing. And I have to tell people, I'm not good at technology, but there's a link here where you can buy your own copy of Luster. And I can tell readers who haven't gotten to it yet that this book just starts out with a bang. There's no introductory blah, blah, blah. There's no fat. It's just all lean, and you don't take your foot off the pedal. Are you as courageous a painter as you are a writer?
No, I hope it doesn't disappoint you, but no, I actually feel like writing is a place where I feel like I have the most control in life. Even painting for me is much more slow going. I feel much more insecure about that medium, and so I feel a different kind of hesitance. So the process for me when I paint a thing is often correcting the mistakes that I've made, and I think that's the like one version of an art making process. But for me, when something is going right on the page, I feel, or when something is going wrong on the page, I should say, I know what's wrong. I can figure it out. When something's going wrong with paint, I have no idea what it is. And so for the moments that I hope kind of absorbed you, I think when I'm writing and I feel that something is urgent and something is going right, then I just have to write toward it. I cannot let that thread go. And I'm glad that you said it starts right away, because that I feel like is really important to me. I want to write for myself, but I also write, with the intent that it be read. And so I wrote hoping that I would be, adequately generous to the audience, whatever audience found my book, in a way where I kept you with me, like I really wrote hoping to keep you with me.
I want you to tell viewers where they can find you on Instagram, because I've seen your paintings there and I think they're lovely. Very, very expressive and very soulful. So
you can find me at Raven Leilani. I think it's Raven_Leilani on Instagram, because there is another Raven Leilani somewhere. So I had to put an underscore in it. But yeah, I'm on Instagram under my name.
you realize you were very not anti, but contra millennial, I should say. You're not the loudest one in the room. You're not self-promoting. You're not really sure what your Instagram handle is. And yet you have become the princess of millennials. You are just beloved. What do you make of that?
I mean, that is really cool. I mean, that is really cool that that people are really clicking with the book. But I mean, I think part of that is that I am a severely introverted person. Like even this part of book stuff, I have really, it's been like a real learning experience. But otherwise, I'm like that bit, the piece you read by Zadie, I'm like, I am the quiet girl in the class. Like I've always been, and I'm myself a private person, but on the page, I'm a totally different person. And that's the only place I'm like that. Yeah. So I think that's part of it. But I really feel, I feel lucky to be embraced by, by people, and and by everyone who's kind of who's read the book and who's read critically and generously. That I can't say enough about how affirming that is, because you write it, it's a solitary endeavor, and that's also I'm very much comfortable in that way. But then the book becomes a public thing, and that part has been really wonderful.
Your sound is a little bit low. I don't know if you had your hand over the mic. I just want to, or maybe it's just my hearing that's going out. In a sense, you remind me of Zadie, because she too is also very introverted. She's never the loudest one in the room, and she likes being in her home. So I wonder, as an introvert, were you somewhat relieved? I'm not going to say the pandemic was a relief, but I'm guessing it's kind of a relief to be able to do these book talks from home and to not have people in your face and in your space.
Oh no, I guess you're right. I think my, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Someone just said they couldn't really hear.
Okay, good.
So in a way, yeah, I will say, I mean, what a thing to say, because it is happening up against the backdrop of this kind of enormous catastrophe, but I think that because I'm a debut author, this is a nice on-ramp to what it would be like. It's a nice way to ease myself into, what it would potentially feel like to be in a room full of people. Though I will say, like, at this point, I am excited about what that might feel like. But it is nice to kind of to be able to do it this way, where I feel like you and I are having, just a kind of like intimate conversation, and I see the people who are here are kind of like, perhaps eavesdropping on it. That's how I feel when I go to events, and like that feels really cool. And I think when the time comes when we're able to be in actual rooms with each other, that will be nice. I do think this is a nice kind of intro to that.
So I'm going to assign you a little job here. You look at the Q&A and pick a question, and I'm going to look at the chat so we can involve our viewers. Oh, this is a good one. And you tell me if I'm going too far as far as spoilers, and you can even give a little preamble to this question, but I don't think it's a spoiler. Why did Rebecca allow Edie to move in, only to kick her out at the end? My question was the reverse.
So their relationship was a complex one, like to depict, for me to render. Once I had all the characters in the house, honestly, like there was a moment where I felt extreme panic, because I was like, oh, I have to balance all of these egos in the same house, and I have to make sure that they're.
Sorry, Raven, before you answer that question, why not give a little set it up for people who have not read the book yet, with no spoilers, of course.
So I think this might be like a light spoiler, but it's in the question, so I'm sure it's okay. But in the second half of the book, Edie moves from New York into her lover's house, where his wife and child are, and so she's there for a stint, and she develops a kind of conspiratorial, adversarial, and also erotic relationship with the wife, Rebecca, and that ends promptly, and Rebecca boots her out. So I will say, I will have to speak on Rebecca's character. Rebecca is a character who likes to be in control. Like from early on in the book, her hand is evident in this open marriage, this arrangement, and that doesn't, that continues to be the case along the book. In fact, I think this is maybe more of a spoiler, but that relationship comes more to the fore, and it becomes more about these two women kind of reconciling the real differences in their lived experiences, but also seeing each other in, sans performance in a way that I think is only possible between women, though it is very complicated. It's complicated because their experiences are almost opposed. But I do think, Rebecca allows her to be there for as long as she is useful. right? Like, because she is getting something out of this. At first, her invitation is based on kind of the faulty assumption that, oh boy, that's another spoiler, that she can help with the child who is there. Um, and then as they move along, their relationship begins to be one that is more independent of the man who is kind of the catalyst for this. And I think Edie is a wild card. She is the opposite of Rebecca. She is not in control. And the moment I think Rebecca realizes that this is not a person that she can control, this is not a situation that is really tenable, she ends it. And I think it needs to end at that point. She no longer needs to be in that house. She has kind of taken what she will from that dynamic. She's been able to do her work and kind of affirm her artistry in a different way, and it's time to leave.
I felt like Edie started out looking for a daddy, and she got the mommy that she needed.
Yes.
Yeah. Did you see the movie Roma last year?
Yes, absolutely.
You remember the opening scene when the father's driving into the driveway and he has to back his car out, and then he tries to pull, and how he was so ill-fitting, and how that just foreshadowed everything we needed to know about his character. I kind of felt a sense, I won't give it away when it happened, but there was a sense of that happening, this ill-fitting thing between Rebecca and Edie, that I thought, I wonder if Raven has seen Roma. Yeah, I love the whole way you set that up. All right, you keep looking down at the questions and I'm looking at the comments. Yeah, I'm looking in the chat and you're looking at the questions.
So someone asked, would I consider writing another book about Edie's next choices in her life? So, I really do miss these characters. I really do. I honestly do kind of miss, who I miss most is Akilah a little bit.
Thank you. Akilah is a boss. Yes.
I think if I'm in the book at all, like me as the author, it is in Akilah's character the most. And I do want, she's a child and she's developing her idea of womanhood and Blackness, and she's only really just begun. So has Edie, but I do think, I will say I probably won't continue continue this story into a different book. Although I do really love when authors kind of do it, write an entirely different book, but let an old character pass through. I love that kind of thing.
Why not? It's your party. You get to decide who's on the guest list.
I do think, as I left this book toward the end, I did want to leave it as it is, which is, it is rather open-ended in the way that I think a artistic journey should be. I think that we talk about, what it means to claim your artistry, and the sexiest version of that journey is one in which, and then she gets it, and then it all happens for her. But I do not think that's, not that it has to be true to life to be in fiction, but I didn't think that was true. And it, for me, it is a process and will continue to be a process. And so I wanted that to kind of remain open, for the possibility of what it means to still have to strive, even when you've found that artistry and are finally able to claim that artistry.
As I mentioned earlier, I had many okay boomer moments. So it was especially gratifying to me when Edie experiences kind of an okay millennial moment, when Akilah shows a level of self-assurance and sure-footedness in her interaction with the police. Yeah. And Edie has to question how she has been navigating that relationship and what is expected of her and why should it be. Do you want to talk about that scene?
Yes, absolutely. And I love the way you put that. I guess I almost didn't think about that parallel. But I really, that moment, I really wanted to be careful, and I wanted to treat with extreme responsibility. I really felt, so the moment that we're talking about is, Edie and Akilah have a of violent interaction with the police, and their responses to the police are different. And I will say that, Edie's response, their responses are different partly because Akilah has been raised in an environment where she would not have received the kind of inside, like a shorthand, inside knowledge that you can only have having lived that. The kind of the talk that I received, I think, at age 7 of what the reality would be in a body like mine. And so part of it is that she hasn't, her authority figures do not live that experience, and so would not have thought to kind of brief her on how to survive those encounters. Because the thing is, like, there isn't a particular way to behave in order to survive. But in that moment, Edie or Akilah kind of resists and is more confident and, like you said, more self-assured in the face of that peril. And Edie is much more of a wreck. She's much more scared. And again, part of that fear is because she understands more of how quickly that can go wrong. And so it's kind of, I'm blowing my mind the way you put that, because I you're right about the sort of generational response to the book, and especially like from an older generation, that response is one of it's coming from a place of, this is how this is how you survive, and that is absolutely what is happening in that moment where Edie is taken aback by a younger person's refusal to play by those rules which have kept her safe.
And they're only separated in age by 11 years.
Yeah.
And yet the mindsets are two different galaxies. All right, now I want you to read the most delicious passage I have read in a novel in a very long time. And this is when Edie is about to leave her the publishing firm where she's working. And there's a cart where you can get some free books, and so she's perusing the selection. You know which passage I'm talking about?
Yes.
Okay, it starts, I go up to the table.
In the lobby, there is a diversity giveaway. I go up to the table and scan the books, and there are a few new ones. A slave narrative about a mixed-race housegirl fighting for a piece of her father's estate. A slave narrative about a runaway's friendship with a white school teacher who selflessly teaches her how to read. A slave narrative about a tragic mulatto who raises the dead with her magic chitlin pies. A domestic drama about a black maid who, like Schrodinger's cat, is both alive and dead, an unseen, nurturing presence who exists only within the bounds of her employer's four walls. An urban romance where everybody dies for gang violence. And a book about a Cantonese restaurant, which may or may not have been written by a white woman from Utah, whose descriptions of her characters rely primarily on rice-based foods. I take the book by the white woman and head outside, where Aria is leaning against the building, smoking a cigarette.
Okay, against that backdrop, first of all, thank you for putting such a fine point on the ignorance that leads so many decisions about how people of color should be represented. As I like to put it, as almost as if we are an amalgamation of the worst things that have been done to us by white people. Yeah. It's laughable, really, and it's insulting. Against that backdrop, you obviously understand the realities of publishing and what sells.
Yeah.
You went in the complete opposite direction. You rewrote the rules and you wrote a woman in full. Did that feel like a brave decision to do that? Did you think, oh, well, nobody will read it, but at least I'll be proud of what I wrote? What was your thinking there?
So it's so funny you say that, because I do think in a way that was like an incarnation of my anxiety about trying to write a different story. Especially like we mentioned before, knowing that you are taking up, like, breathing rare air, and in kind of one of the few who has been afforded the privilege to write a story, right, that may, that readers might come to. I felt a real, I felt the presence of the marketplace. Mm-hmm. And I felt, and I resented the idea that that my story perhaps would only have value if my story was the kind of story that is, I don't know how to articulate it.
Reductive,
Yeah, that
flattened, tragic.
is the only way to represent the Black experience. You know, I also want to preface that by saying that, you know, it is, you know, the people who have experienced trauma, the telling of the trauma is frequently the only power they have. So I don't want to diminish, you know, the power and value in telling the stories that are hard, but I wanted to write a story that was not inextricable, a story that could live independently of like the kind of sexiness of Black pain, right? Like I felt a responsibility to write a woman who was free and who was led by her id, and I absolutely felt the anxiety of writing against an industry where that story might not be welcome. So like I wrote with a kind of freedom, but I also wrote with a kind of fear, if I'm honest.
Well, if I had a hat on, I'd take it off too. All right, you get back in the Q&A section and I'm going to go back to the chat. I just want to make sure that I involve everyone who wants to say something or ask something. Questions. I see a note from Kate saying there are questions in the Q&A section for you.
Oh, sorry.
And I'll check the time as well, so that Kate, feel free to drop in. Okay, yeah, we have about, I'd say another 15 minutes to go.
Do I have any particular worries about seeing the book come out? What keeps me awake at night about the whole publishing process? I think by the time it came out, I was really ready for it to be out. It really truly is the one area of life, because it is something I write with the intent that it be shared, that I felt more excitement than anxiety about this thing being out in the world. But I will say, what keeps me up at night, what keeps me up at night around this process is being able to articulate myself exactly as I mean around this book. Because when you write a book, you write anything, or at least that's the case with me, you have the benefit of time to deliberate, to express yourself precisely. And in real time, that is much harder, and it's truly much harder for me. And so what keeps me up at night is the feeling that I haven't articulated myself precisely as I would on the page. But those are two different things, so I'm kind of being a little bit kinder to myself as I go on. But otherwise, I just feel like the response to the book has been so wonderful, and I feel so lucky for it, that it really just kind of has been a dream.
I know that, well, I've read that you write in bed. I only know one other author who does that successfully, Lisa Cross-Smith.
Oh, amazing.
I would be falling asleep. I would be making snacks. I'd be watching TV. How are you managing to crank out such beautiful work while working from the comfort? Are you in your PJs when you're writing? Like, do you bother to put on a suit and halfway try to be professional?
Part of it is that, like, once I'm locked into a piece of writing, I'm at my most vulnerable, like, hands down. And so that's part of why I cannot write in public. And this may sound extremely precious. And, I like the idea. I tried it a few times of going out and getting a coffee and setting up. It's not something you would do like right now in this moment. But I really need to feel that I can be as unguarded as possible, write well, and out in public, I don't feel that. I don't feel that. Right now, I'm currently in bed writing, like I'm, talking to you from the spot where I write. But I do. I write in bed, partly because home is a place where I feel safe. I need to feel safe in order to write.
All right, you said, oh, Lisa, when I brought up Lisa's name, what would you like to say about or to her? She's probably watching tonight.
She's wonderful. She's wonderful. So you can glow. Incredible.
Yes, yeah, we adore her.
Yeah.
Can you listen to music while you're writing?
I always do. I actually, that's also something I need to do. I'm very, like, it's also a part of why I can't be in a public place, because I'm like, you cannot hear anything. So I'm really vulnerable. But yes, always I listen to music. And in this case, a lot of disco.
A lot of what kind of music?
Disco.
A lot of really?
Yes.
How does a millennial develop interest in disco? Must come from a Disney movie soundtrack or something.
No, my mom, she's pretty much where I got all of my tastes from. And, we would take these long road trips when I was younger. And, there was always Donna Summer, there was always Sister Sledge, there was Daz Band, there was all of that, and it's just like, I love disco so much. And like, that's part of why it's in the book as much as it is, but it really is, to me, it's a real joyful genre. And I don't think at this point, I actually think it's come back, and, we have stopped we've stopped diminishing it as a genre. We understand that it's really kind of glorious, and it's queer, and it's Black, and it's just, it fits an era when I think we're all trying to be more earnest, trying to be vulnerable enough to simply enjoy the things that are enjoyable, that are straightforwardly about joy.
I enjoyed it unironically when I was your age, and I can tell you that it was joyful.
Yeah.
Not the most profound experience, but always joyful.
Yeah.
All right, so there's a part of you that writes from bed, so now you're like Hugh Hefner and Lisa Cross-Smith, and then another part of you that will walk from Crown Heights to the Village.
Yes.
And your Edie has been described as a flaneur. You have been described as a flaneur who's going places in the New York Times review. What a glowing review. Tell me what it is that that walking either does to either stimulate your imagination or inform your writing or inform your character studies. What do you get from walking?
So I also feel strangely, even though I'm not in public, and it also has to do, I think, with the city I'm in. We talked about New York and the way that we love it, and the way that that's inextricable from the way that we hate it, maybe. But there is a density to the city where you were afforded an anonymity that is really comforting to me. And so when I'm out in the city, I don't, I really do feel like unseen enough to observe. And I always have my headphones in, so I'm kind of walking, and I feel, able to kind of, like, it feels like a, I don't feel, although I'm observing, I don't feel, I don't even know how to articulate it. I feel kind of like what's happening is an autonomic, activity where my body is moving of its own accord, and I am at rest in a way. So for me, it really is a mind clearing activity. And because the city is such a pedestrian city, I mean, when I moved to DC, I just assumed, right, that it would also be a pedestrian city. And I remember I stopped to ask a man for directions, like from downtown Silver Spring to like Georgetown or something.
Oh, that's a hike.
Yeah, and he was like, you're gonna walk? And I was like, yes, and then he laughed at me. But here, you can walk everywhere, and you can also just kind of wander and get lost. No matter how lost you get, there's like there's an avenue or a subway where you can kind of just take get back to where you were. So it's almost it feels like a very kind of low risk wandering that is also, that also I do in a city like this, where I feel like life is happening hyperbolically at every moment. And so no matter what you see, it is something that feels remarkable. And I think that feeds writing.
Mm-hmm. How has talking about luster fed you? How is the feedback, literally and figuratively, feeding you as a writer, as an artist, as a creator?
It has been, because I wrote Luster, and I think, during a moment where I was working full time and pursuing my MFA full time, and I also had like a few kind of side gigs, and that was always the way that I had written. You know, it was always kind of after, you know, after the 9 to 5, and you know, I was kind of throwing, you know, kind of darts with my short stories that I've been writing before this, trying to get, you know, get a little bit of traction, you know, here and there. But much of the work is private, you know, and much of the work is rejection. And I think I had to get good with that. I think if you want to, you know, make anything, you have to get good with that. And so to have written a thing that, you know, about that, you know, Edie is also in the middle of that, of trying to, of that balance. But to have also, to be a person who, you know, wrote this book amidst, you know, trying to balance, you know, that question of survival and also making art that felt meaningful, and to be able to talk about it now with people who are, you know, enthusiastic and critical, you know, reading critically, is so, it is so affirming. Like it is, it's what you hope will happen when you put something out in the world. And in some cases, like right now, you know, we were just talking about, you know, the way you read that moment with Edie and Akila and the police, like it is so cool to talk with people and see your book in a totally different way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, to learn something about what you made is a really beautiful thing, because it means that the person who was reading cared enough to read that closely. And so that, you know, this book was a real earnest act for me. And so being able to talk about it with people who are also earnest is just, like, that has been really incredible.
You know, one of my biggest worries for your generation, Raven, is that with social media, there's this idea that you have to be a megastar and you have to, you know, your first effort has to be a complete success. And that's not how the world works. So for any young creative people watching right now, I just want to read some of the jobs that you held after graduating from university. You were an imaging specialist at Ancestry.com. You were an archivist for the Department of Defense. You were a staffer at a scientific journal and a Postmates delivery person. Oh, and a production associate at Macmillan. And I've also heard you talk about how not making it and rejection as an artist taught you what it means to be an artist. So talk about the value of rejection, the value of just wondering, am I even doing the right thing?
Yes,
Why does that matter? Yeah.
It really felt like that's a significant part of any art making process. Like even if it's writing, if it's painting, if it's music, if it's, you know, if it's whatever you were trying to move toward, I would say that in the middle of it, you know, before you break through or while you're trying to break through and you're doing that private work and you're kind of, I would say that private work is still meaningful work. There is the feeling that if it isn't seen, then it isn't real, and that isn't the case. You know, all the work you're doing is moving you forward. All of it is valuable, and I think that, you know, even the work you throw away is valuable because you had to do that work to get to the next piece. You know, to get to the next bit, and you know, I think also, especially if you're holding a full-time job and the work that you're doing is kind of like small, steady work. So you can't like bang out, you know, 50 pages in a week and it feels like the work is incremental. That's also still work, you know. So I would say stay the course, even if it feels like what's happening is happening slowly, even if it feels like it's not happening at all because it's private. It's still you working on your craft, and if you are putting in the work, then you are that. You have the right to say, I am an artist, you know, because you are putting in the work.
Beautifully put. All right, I'm going to have you check the Q&A section one more time, and then I will just remind readers that if you haven't read it already, I highly recommend Luster. If you are a millennial, get it for your mama and your aunties and people who don't understand you, and vice versa. If you are older and you want to understand the younger generation, or reach out to them and share something special, this is a beautiful, beautiful book. I'm proud of you, Raven. I'm proud of you, and I'm grateful that we got to meet. I'm sorry it has to be virtual, but for your sake, I'm glad you get to be in your PJs in bed, comfortable. Were there any more questions in the chat?
I'm looking.
This is Kate. Hi, welcome back.
You are Kate Whitman.
I was just gonna say, since we're running short on time, a lot of people, I'm gonna like put two together. So people are asking what you're working on now, if you feel comfortable sharing, and then we will end our event.
So I'm not really working on anything that I feel like I can talk about yet. So I will say, I am not a person where once I have an idea, it is fully realized. It's like writing so much is like an act of discovery for me, and I have to write a good portion of it to know if it's going to work. So I'm not really, I can't say I'm writing anything quite yet. And life right now is mostly kind of, taken up with the launch of this book. But that has been really kind of a dream that my life now kind of gets to be that. Beautiful.
Well, hey, if I were cranking out the paintings you were, I'd be bragging about that. So I'll do it for you. Go to Raven's Instagram page, Raven_Leilani or something like that, and see her beautiful paintings. I wish you continued blessings and success and truth telling. You make me proud, and I'm happy we got to meet this evening.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for putting us together, Kate.
Yes.
And thank you, Sarita, for making this happen.
Thank you both, Gail. You are truly a deep reader. I love that Raven could tell how deeply and affectionately you read this book. It is wonderful. If you do not get it from Acapella Books, please get it from an independent bookstore. And Raven and Gail, thank you both so much.
Thanks for having us. Bye.